What's going on, everybody? Greg Peters here with the Car Passion channel, and we are here again at Advanced Engine Dynamics to test some more bolt-ons. You guys seem to really love that last video. So today we're testing the Exhintake cam swap, adjustable cam gears, a Squaretop intake manifold, and I have some trickery to do with a new intake after my eyes were opened and my brain was blown by the unicorn intake from last time, making an extra like 4 or 5 wheel horsepower. So we're gonna test out all that stuff today. My goal, and it is lofty, I'm fully aware of that, is to walk off this dyno at 155 wheel horsepower. Last time I rolled off the dyno, it made 136. The reason I want to shoot for 155 is number one, I believe this thing is a true factory freak. I know it can do it, but the Mazda Speed Miata from factory made about 153 to 155 horsepower at the wheels on a dyno jet, which is the same dyno that I'm using today. So if this thing could match the factory horsepower of a stock Mazda Speed Miata, which is factory turbo for you guys that don't know, that would just be sick. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into another long day of doing pulls. All right, so we're getting ready for our first. All right, so we're getting ready for. All right, so we're getting ready for our first pull here. Oh, who done left the compressor on? Where is that thing at? All right, so we're getting ready for our first power pull of the day. The only thing that's different right now is it does have the Exhintake cam swap. The tune is completely untouched from last time. Now, it does have the adjustable cam gears, but they're zeroed out, so the cam timing has not been altered. We're gonna see how much power it makes just with that mod, so let's jump in. So we've got a little bit of an unexpected turn of events. I was hoping to see a 6 to 8 horsepower gain just from throwing in the Exhintake cam. And what we've got here is actually a loss of about 7 horsepower and 9 pound-feet of torque at the wheels. So, as I said, nothing in the tune has changed since last time. So there's a couple things that could be going on. Number one, the motor could be dying. It's always a possibility, although highly unlikely. The other thing that could be going on that I'm leaning towards is, even though the cam gears are supposedly zeroed out, there are 2 variables that could be affecting this. As I showed in the cam gear installation video, I had to drill the intake cam gear for the Exhintake cam. So if I'm off by a few degrees on that hole, that will definitely affect the power. The other thing is, on the OBX cam gear, it seems pretty generic to me. I don't think it's super R&D'd for the Miata. If this were to be off by, say, half a tooth or something, the factory exhaust cam could be advanced or retarded, which could also cause this loss of power. All right, no need to be alarmed here, but after these initial results, the first things we wanted to check before making any adjustments were the things that could have changed during the recent installation of parts. So we checked the timing belt just to make sure that I had set it up properly, and also checked the base ignition timing, which, even though I said it once, just wanted to double check that to make sure nothing funky was going on there. And we didn't find a problem with either of those items. So even though I wanted to save the cam gear tuning for the last part of the day, if the cam timing was messed up to begin with the installation of these gears, I had to fix it right up front. So I started playing with cam timing. Kind of the point of buying adjustable cam gears is that you really need to bring it to a dyno to tune them. The only part that sucks is I really don't know. I'm not gonna know exactly how much power the Exhintake cam is gonna add once I start playing with the timing. But it seems like the timing's already been played with because it seems off, unless the motor's dying. All right, so let the cam gear tuning begin. Now, since these gears are not marked with any numbers of degrees or anything, the system I came up with to help explain what I'm doing is, if a cam is advanced as far as the gear will let it go, I'm gonna call that 100% advanced. If it's halfway between 0 and fully advanced, I'm just gonna call that 50% advanced. So I'm gonna do several pulls here with the cams at various positions, and then I'll pull all the dyno overlays up and I'll explain what exactly happened. And something that I didn't really notice that that much at first, but I'll get into more later in the video, is when I would do repeated pulls, the car would gain a little bit of power each time. And it's not like the engine was cold on the first pull, it was fully warmed up and it would gain 1 or 2 horsepower every time. So even before I touched these cam gears, the car did do 129 wheel horsepower pull, but obviously that was still much lower than I was expecting. So let's jump into these cam gears and see what happens. This thing's gonna sound probably pretty choppy when I fire it up right now. I'll get a little sound clip. I think it's gonna have probably a little beefier mid-range, but I don't think it's gonna do much for the top end. But hey, what do I know? I lost 7 horsepower by upgrading the cam already, so there goes my credibility. Why won't this thing lope already? All right, let's see those cam timing gains, boys. I'm gonna put on screen here the best pull thus far of the day, and then I'm gonna overlay some more pulls with the cams set in many, many different positions. Small disclaimer here, if your Miata head is stock and you have stock cams, you can run the cams at any sort of timing and you're never gonna have a valve contact issue. But if your head is skimmed, if you have a thinner head gasket, if you have bigger cams, if you have different pistons, and you max out one of your cam gears, you could cause valve to piston contact, and that equals basically a new head. So don't go maxing out your cam gears unless you're confident that there's not going to be a contact issue, okay? All right, so I want to start with some of the most interesting information. The blue is our baseline, the green is the intake cam at half advance, and the red is the intake cam at full advance. And at the extreme end here, I was able to gain about 13 foot-pounds of torque, but up in the high RPM, that came at a price of about 15 wheel horsepower. But this is just a great demonstration of how adjusting the cam timing really just shifts the power band around. And this green line might be preferable for someone who wants this type of power band. I mean, it gained power from 2000 RPM all the way up to about 5300, and then it only lost about 6 horsepower up top. This was pretty interesting also when I retarded the intake cam at about 50%. It lost power everywhere except above 6600 RPM. There's actually a tiny gain up there. And then when I went fully retarded on the intake cam, it made it so it lost a ton of power basically everywhere. Over on the exhaust cam, I don't know where the half advanced dyno went, but the yellow line here is the exhaust cam at full advance. Remember, half advance was basically just directly in between these two. There wasn't really much interesting about it, but it lost power everywhere here. Retarding the exhaust cam really didn't seem to do too much. There was a little bit of gain with the cam fully retarded from 3500 up to about 4800, but up in the high RPM, there was not much difference in horsepower. Now I want to bring up something super cool. This dyno overlay here is every intake cam angle that I tried, and this chart right here single-handedly shows why VVT is so awesome. So every color represents a different cam angle, but what if we could change the cam angle based on the RPM? Watch what I do with this bright green line right here. So as you can see here, the yellow line makes the most torque in this RPM range, but all of a sudden the red line takes over. So we're gonna adjust the cam angle to make sure it follows that red line. Now up here at 4800, the yellow line takes back over. So we're gonna adjust that cam back to that angle. But all of a sudden the blue line takes over, and then at the very high RPM, the dark blue line takes over, highest torque. So we can continuously adjust that intake cam to follow that highest torque curve, and that is why VVT is so great. Now let's take a look at all the exhaust angles and see what that looks like. Now I want to ignore the red full advance line because all that did was lose power. If we look at all the other lines here, the power really just can't be adjusted that much in stock form. So I can totally see here why Mazda would not want to put in the R&D and the production cost of doing VVT on the intake and exhaust. There's clearly way more power to be had by adjusting the intake cam angle, so why would you double your cost for minimal gains? Now if this engine revved a lot higher or had big cams in it, that might be a different story, but that's for a little bit later in the project. Now although I was attempting to distract you guys with cam tuning information, some of you astute followers may have noticed something. Where the heck is all my horsepower at? Through all that tuning, I was only able to get up to 130 horsepower. I'm still 6 horsepower short of where I was last time, and I've got a bigger cam and now optimized cam timing. Pure sadness is what it is. Obviously I'm pretty disappointed so far. It's got a bigger cam in it, and after all the cam gear adjustments, it's making 6 horsepower less than the last time I left the dyno. Still don't know why. Shouldn't really be a cam timing issue because I just changed the cam timing all around and couldn't find a single horsepower. I'm gonna change the intake manifold to a square top now. I really can't think of anything else to do, but push on. So I'm still optimistic we'll be at least in the 140s at the end of the day with the square top, several different intake configurations. I think we'll still make a little bit of power today, but obviously right now I'm a little bit disappointed. Aha! I've had enough already. I got a new goal for today. By the end of the day, I want to see this thing making 113 horsepower. Fully tuned, full bolt-ons. I just want to get back to where I started, honestly. We'll see if we can do it. $130, that's what I was gonna make. What can I do other than just laugh and enjoy my time here at Advanced Engine Dynamics?
Learning and not wondering anymore.
Yeah. So here's the new overlay with the Squaretop intake manifold installed, and the results are pretty much the same as all the results I've ever seen online. There's a little bit of swapping around of torque curves in the low RPM and mid-range, but above 5800 is where the Squaretop really shines with a peak gain of about 3.5 wheel horsepower. And these should be accentuated if your engine makes more power, i.e. supercharged, turbocharged. The Squaretop really starts to shine in the high RPM where the flow is the highest. And although the car is making more power than ever, if I overlay my previous best, you can still see that we have not even made it back to 136. So I ended up doing a little bit more troubleshooting here on the car, trying to figure out what the heck could be wrong. We made sure the dyno straps weren't too tight, the rear tire pressure wasn't low, the e-brake wasn't dragging. I put new spark plugs in the car, I gapped them. We were thinking maybe the muffler or the resonator was like internally falling apart, so I even did a run on open headers. And And as you can see, that was not the problem. It actually lost a little bit of power, which I'm not saying having the exhaust on adds power. I think this is more of that strange power fluctuation issue that I've been having, especially today. The car would fluctuate up to 6 horsepower, which is not normal, assuming all conditions are the same. But at this point, I didn't think I was really going to be able to make it much better, so I figured I would test out all this different intake piping that I brought with me. So I basically had several different elbows and pieces of piping and configurations that I wanted to try on this engine, and I did multiple runs with each one to make sure that the horsepower variance thing wasn't going to affect it too much. And yes, some of them do stick out of the hood like this one here, but I could fit this intake in if I did a power steering delete. And I know a lot of people were saying, oh, test all the intakes with the hood closed so you can see which one is cold air. I don't really care about that. I'm only testing the flow of the different intakes. You could really build an air box and a little intake from the outside to any of these setups, but I cared about what configuration is going to flow the most air. I don't care about what's going to keep intake temps low. That's also going to be affected by if the car's moving or not. So yeah, that's not part of this test. So this is the first configuration that I tested, and supposedly, according to an online post from 949 Racing, is the optimal Miata intake system, minus one little detail, and that is mine is a little bit too long. So you want to have this large radius bend coming off the throttle body, and then the total distance from the throttle plate to the end of the piping where it opens up into the filter needs to be about 21 inches on a 1.8 liter or about 19 inches on a 1.6. Mine here is about 27 inches. So actually, if I cut it down, I might be able to fit the filter with the power steering pump reservoir. So I might try that later. I also tried this configuration here, which is actually the correct intake length, but it has the less optimal tight silicone bend going into the throttle body. So those two things might offset each other by a little bit. And then I tried this setup, which I like because it's really compact, and I wanted to see just how much of a difference there was in flow compared to the longer tube intake styles. A better way to set this up might be like I'm showing here with the larger radius bend off the throttle body, but I'd have to cut that down to be able to fit the air filter in that area behind the headlight. And this is another intake setup that you may have seen on Miatas. I did not test this one, but apparently it's just as good or better than the large radius bend that goes across to the headers. So you still have the long sweeping bend, and as long as you make that intake length correct, you should be able to get pretty much the most power you can from an intake. And of course, since I'm on a standalone, I didn't have the mass airflow sensor in place for any of these tests, but it has already been tested before that there's not a significant pressure drop across the mass airflow sensor, so you're not gaining a bunch of horsepower by deleting the MAF. That is different on a 1.6 liter where the AFM or airflow meter is quite restrictive. So anyways, let's check out the results from the tests that I did. All right, so here's a fresh baseline pull with the current conditions in the shop at 132.7 horsepower. The first test I'm going to do is the little shorty intake that kicks right off the throttle body. So there seems to be a pretty big gain in the low RPM, although I'm really not too concerned with this area down here because I don't use it very often. It did lose the odd little bump in torque here, which this is not from a Helmholtz resonator because the NBs don't have one, but it's some sort of resonance with the stock intake tube or something like that. But where it starts to count, basically everything above 4,400 RPM, there's a jump in 2 to 3 foot-pounds of torque, and up in the high end, it's good for almost 4 horsepower at the wheels over the Racing Beat intake. This is the run using the long intake and the sharp 90-degree bend, and it did gain power from about 4,200 up to about 6,200, and then in the high end, there's a tiny bit of a loss, but I would call that kind of negligible. I've seen variances bigger than that between the poles, so I don't think that's really anything to write home about. And then the clear breadwinner was the quote optimal intake. Even though it was a few inches too long, it did make the highest power of the day at just over 137 wheel horsepower, with gains over all the other intakes above 5,600 RPM. So I may optimize this further later, but obviously there's some kind of issue going on with the car, and I didn't want to spend a ton of time doing this. But the intake I'm going to leave on for now is actually the sharp 90 off the throttle body. It did make over 136, and that's nice and compact and easy to just run with for now. And the way that first dyno looked of the day, it was like losing the same amount of power throughout all the RPM. It almost looked like the AC was on, which the AC was not on, but I thought, hey, what if the power steering pump is eating itself and I could just take that power steering belt off and there comes all my horsepower. So that was the next test that I did, and here are the results. It was not the shockingly massive gain that I was hoping for, but it was worth about 3 wheel horsepower at the top end. So for the rest of the day, just desperate to break the 140 barrier, I left that belt off and continued on to some further cam gear tuning. tuning. And when I say further tuning, I was gonna break 140 whether that engine wanted to or not. And I did end up breaking 140 with a peak power run of 142.12 wheel horsepower. So here's the comparison of the best pull in the morning compared to the final power pull of the day for a peak gain of just over 12 wheel horsepower. So yes, the car is faster than when I came in. And yes, it is making the most power it ever has. But I'm still a little confused. Here, take a look at this. This is the best power pull of the day compared to the previous best pull that the car did before. So above 6,300 RPM, it is making a little bit more power, but at the cost of 16 foot-pounds of torque at 3,900 RPM. To give you an idea of how much power loss that actually is, here is the car's bone stock dyno versus today's best pull. Now let's have a look at everything below 4,600 RPM. The car is basically making stock power below 4,600. In fact, at 3,700, it's actually making 3 foot-pounds less torque than stock. What? There's no reason that with a better intake manifold, a better cam, optimized cam timing, and an unarguably better intake system, that the car should be making 16 foot-pounds of torque less. That is a 15% drop in torque. Well, we made more power than before. That torque curve was up where it should be. I think it would be over 150 right now.
It looked familiar.
Just don't know where don't know where the power is going. Maybe I'll figure it out someday. Okay, so what do you guys think about everything that happened in this video? Obviously, the car has come a long way from when it was stock, and I really think that I was able to collect some good data today, because if you look at it like, okay, I started with 129 horsepower, and then I got to apply all these mods and see how they affected the engine, and it did make a good chunk more horsepower. But obviously there is something going on with the car. So what I want you guys to do is drop down below in the comments what you think the issue might be. I have no idea what it is yet, but my next step is to jump into that thing and start hunting for what could be causing this problem. So anyways, don't forget that subscribe button if you are new, smash the like button if you learned something, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.